were starting to talk about grief. And the
Mm.
Z's were talking about how we can get so stuck in loss and grief, but that there's a better way to have a relationship with loss, especially like a tragic loss. Can you talk
Yeah.
more about that?
It's interesting. So, we're currently working on book 4. We're talking about book 2 today, and book 3 will be demystifying reincarnation and karma.
Oh,
And book 4, I'm not sure what the exact title is, but it's along the lines of the spiritual power of death, dying, and grief. And when I first heard that title, I'm like, oh, maybe that's a bit heavy. And they were like, no, no, no. They were like, no, no, no. It's really important because your world is having to come to mature around grief and around death and dying. And, if you look at all the stuff that we're going through the last few years and what's flying around, it's true. We are having to grapple with it in a new way. And they say that's part of the transformation of this time that we're in. So they call grief the great transformer. They say it's really important for us to understand that grief is a transformational process. Now, if, let's say you've just lost the love of your life, you're probably going to be on the floor emotionally and mentally, for maybe 3 months, maybe 12 months, who knows? Because everybody's so personal. Because also what happens in grief is they say that a grief window opens in you because of one catalyst. So maybe my dog passes away and I suddenly feel guilty because I am grieving my dog more than I grieved my father-in-law, for example. And I'm like, oh, why am I? And the Z's will say, well, because this dog for you was total heart connection with no interruption, because the pets can't speak and they're not carrying human density and emotion. So they say, don't judge your level of grief. Your level of grief is your level of connection. So the reason you can grieve that pet is because they kept the heart field and the emotion and the flow alive. So what you're grieving the loss of that relationship you had with the pet who could do that for and with you, and you miss them. But equally, they say that when we open up a grief window, all the old stuff has the opportunity to come out, which is why sometimes grief seems illogical. You're like, my God, why am I still crying about this 4 months later when I didn't cry about my father-in-law 5 years ago? Well, because the pet helped you open your heart. And actually, your father-in-law is in there. It might be a bit more hidden to you consciously, but that's why often I've experienced this in 2 dark nights of the soul I've had myself. And I've seen this with other people going through dark nights of the soul. Often dark night of the soul is a kind of sentence we give to a deep grief release period in our life where 1, 2, or 3 things go off in our life that just send us into a complete grief purge. And in the moment of that grief purge, depending on the level of support you're able to find, receive, give yourself, that's going to feel, quite tumultuous and can be very, very difficult. But when the grief period is done and the storm clouds start to clear and you start to see sun coming through, you are never the same person again. Because of that grief journey, because of the loss of that person, because of the grief window that opened in you and everything that poured out of you, your frequency has changed. So they call grief the great transformer, and they say the traditional fear of death on the planet is a little strange to them because the death and birth window are the same. We come in from spirit in birth and we leave back to spirit through death. And having been present for birth and death in my own life, the frequency was so similar. Like when someone literally passes over and when you meet a baby, I have never been at an actual birth of a baby, but I was there an hour afterwards. There was this spiritual energy in both of those spaces. And so grief is the great transformer because it really makes us very present. It's why people will say, I'm really raw with grief right now, but they might feel very, very alive and heightened in a way they don't normally because they've really brushed up against that window through which we all enter and that window through which we'll all return. because of the connection they had to that lost loved one who's gone through the window ahead of them. But in our attachment to them, we get as close to that window as we can, and it opens us.